Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode. I'm actually really excited about this one for various reasons. Honestly, I feel like every episode starts like this. Hey, I'm really excited about today's episode. Oh, I know I always say that. But honestly, there is so much beauty that exists in this world, and there is so many opportunities for us to really pursue understanding or having an understanding of something greater than us. And in many personal development doctrines, there's this idea that we all have an angel and a devil on our shoulder. We all have the internal critic just as well as we have the internal motivator. And I'm recording this in my car because this is where all my greatest downloads come in. But I've been thinking about this because I was listening to a podcast episode where it was by a guy named John Gordon. And he was literally talking about that concept about, choosing to listen to the voices on our shoulder, those of positivity or those of negativity. And that in many cases, when we actually start to dissect, that inner critic or that negative voice within our head, we realize that these aren't even our thoughts, because who would actually choose to listen to negative thoughts about themselves, right? Like if you sat there and you're like, why am I actually listening to this? Like, I don't actually believe this, or even if I do believe this, why do I believe this? Like, that's not positive, that's not reinforcing, that's not empowering, that's not helpful, right? And so when you would sit and think about that, you would actually start to have self-awareness that, oh, okay, I'm not going to let this autopilot drive the bus anymore, right? And you can even take that right now in your life and think about what area of your life or what experience right now are you not taking action on, and are you actually listening to the inner critic in lieu of that, right? And so what is that voice? What are they saying? What is that devil on your shoulder saying? How are you being swayed into negativity? And equally, what outside of you are you plugging into in your environment, in your community, in your conversations, in your circles, friendships, family, all the things where they tend to be more negative driven, whether that's in the lieu of judgment, in gossip, in lack of communication, in lack of helpfulness, in virtue signaling, right? So you can start to really expand on that and realize what you're being fed spiritually. And the reason that this really struck a chord with me is because I've been having a lot of internal discussions with women in my coaching containers as well as in my community about this idea of self-righteous being our higher self, or tapping into our higher selves, and where God conflicts, the ideology of God conflicts with the whole concept of spirituality. And this isn't even just like me versus them or them versus me, or equally spirituality versus Christianity, because the same concept applies and is taken advantage of in both places, in all places. And it is why I truly believe, and why I lean first into God and Scripture, not my idea of God, but Scripture, the words of what He says, because when it left up to ourselves, we will inherently make a decision that in the interim we think is good, but in the long term isn't good. And because we don't have outside counsel, or we think what we're doing is good enough, we won't seek outside counsel. So we'll leave ourselves up to, well, I just didn't know better. But sometimes that very reasoning can actually not be a good enough excuse. I'll give you an example. If you were to go and pee out in public, and it's past midnight, it's late at night, maybe you're out drinking, maybe you're out for a walk, whatever the case may be, and you go and you pee in public, and you don't notice that there's a park around you, you can still get a citation, if not even a criminal offense as a sex offender, for peeing in public. And the argument that I didn't know that the park was near, or I didn't know that that was actually a law that I could get a criminal offense for, that isn't good enough, right? The law doesn't expect you to know the millions of pages that there are inside and out, but the argument that I just didn't know enough will not hold up in court. Just like if you were caught speeding in a school zone. I didn't know that the speed changed because I didn't see a sign wouldn't hold up. Well, you're still in a school zone. Even if you saw the school or saw the sign or didn't, it still applies. The rules still apply. It is expected of us to go to the extra extent to understand the decisions that we're about to make. And that still comes back in context to the devil on your shoulder and the angel on your shoulder, the inner critic and the voice of empowerment that we have within us, regardless of our faith or our foundation of our beliefs. And where I'm leading this to is one of the biggest things that really tipped me off with spirituality, and I equally see it in the lens of Christianity as well, is that there's this guise that people hide behind where it's, okay, I'm making these decisions because I know the universe is going to provide. I'm making these decisions because I know that God will provide. I prayed to God on this decision, so I know that it is good enough. I took this action in lieu of the universe, and so it should be good enough. But then when someone gets burned on either end, or something happens that's not ideal on either end, where is the accountability of taking that extra effort to do the research in lieu of that experience? Now, if you're someone who says, damn it, this really sucks. I really don't like this. This is traumatic, emotional, angering in whatever way, absolutely. But where can I be more accountable for my actions in the future so I can avoid or mitigate these experiences? That's where we really need to start taking a deeper look. Because it's one thing to say, I prayed on this and I really felt like it was the best decision, and I really thought that this was going to be a good thing for all parties, or I really prayed on this and this investment was going to be like, this was going to be the end all be all, and even though I'm betting my rent or this or that on this, my family's well-being to some degree and extent, where does the accountability lie in those decisions or doing further research? What knowledge do you have to actually back that up? Because as much as there is always a component that requires faith, always, and I am not naive to the fact that you can only do so much research regardless and still end up in a situation where you do need to self-reflect, whether it works out for the benefit or not. Especially when it involves other people's lives, it is so important to understand that no matter what step you take in alignment with faith, in alignment with trusting some spiritual force, there is always an act of accountability that you can't just blame on other people or circumstantial to justify the means that you still took. The whole point of personal development and self-accountability is literally in its name. It is the personal development of self-awareness to realize that in all parts, you are always still playing a part. In a case where I bet our rent on a coach in the very beginning, if that wouldn't have worked out, I still had to have difficult conversations where I said, hey, my rent's going to be a couple days late. I'm so sorry, but I will absolutely make sure that I get it to you. I still had to have those difficult conversations. I equally had to be accountable for having the conversation of, hey, mom or dad, I really fucked up. I need to pay my rent. Is there any way you can help me? And if they said no, accepting that conversation of what that would have looked like if the no existed, right? But thankfully, it all worked out. We were able to pay our rent a couple days later. In many cases, we will often do things under the idea that we're helping someone else. This can even be coaching, right? Coaches do this all the time. Going out of their way to help someone that they see is in desperate need of some form of help, whether it be finances, whether it be life, whether it be relationships, whether it be their past inner child healing. And under the guise of doing the right thing and praying on it and meditating on it, they accept the client. They accept this person into their house. They accept this person into their wheel, into their circle, into their realm. But to what extent are you qualified to actually help that person is what I'm getting at. And what if that person you bring in is incredibly mentally unstable, whether you have the prior knowledge of this or not? I'm assuming, and I would hope, that if you're taking on any clients, even in some form of a session, right? Past life regressions, you're going to go and unlock someone's subconscious. I really hope that you have the understanding of what you're doing and what could transpire in the worst case scenario. And do you have the policies in place to back you up and the client for safety purposes if a mental psychosis is induced? Like, these are very real things that happen all the time that a lot of people don't think about because they've gone on a healing journey. It has helped them tremendously, and now they want to turn around and help other people. It is why I chose to heavily invest in psychological studies and understanding, and I'm still taking courses to this day, and crisis management being probably the first one you should always start with, to better understand how to handle and appropriately discern the capacity in which you can hold space for a person, a client, a family member, a friend. And the reason why I bring this up is because we live in a society and we live in an industry where everything, regardless of whether it's our initial or conscious intention or not, is a sense of virtue signaling. And there can only be so much virtue signaling until something goes wrong. And to what degree do you then take accountability for your part in that? Versus just then blaming it on God, a demonic possession, a person being too unstable. They weren't a good fit. It's like, sure, but what degrees of protection did you take? And what levels of steps did you take to actually help you in the appropriateness of that decision that you made? Because I've worked with a lot of coaches who come to me for training. One of the things that I teach and train my coaches on, even spiritualists who want to have a better capacity of walking people through deeper transformations, is understanding perspectives and understanding points of views and understanding how to see through the lens of somebody else. And that both takes understanding how to read someone's energy as much as it understands a mental understanding, or as much as it requires, a mental understanding of being able to shift your perspective to one of listening and learning, which is more objective, to one of, I'm the expert in this field, let me problem solve for you. See, as a coach, as someone who holds space, period, for somebody else, whether it's inviting them in their home or inviting them in a coaching container, or even inviting them in a one-on-one session that has anything to do with the context of healing, you have to be able to understand how to hold those two dynamics, which requires training, which requires further education, which actually in some cases even requires outside counseling. I have two coaches that I turn to, one that is hired and one that we just have a mutual agreement to support each other with. Whenever I need that support, or I don't feel qualified, or I don't know what to do in a certain case, or I just genuinely need outside counsel, I never take it upon myself to just assume that I know best. And this is where, in the context of spirituality and arguably the morale of life, God plays such a vast role in it. Because if we're left up to our own subjectation of making decisions, we will always fall short. That's the whole point of us needing God, of needing Jesus to support us, is that we always will fall short. We never can have all the information. We never can have all the appropriate counsel. But at the end of the day, you always have God that's going to forgive you in your wrongdoings. But you also, and part of that forgiveness, have to accept and take responsibility and accountability for the actions that you have taken. And the reason that I want to share this today is because whether you're someone who's on a journey of overcoming challenges of your past, or whether you are someone who is especially helping others to try and overcome experiences of their past in any capacity or degree, I really invite you to think about what information or where you're sourcing your information to help you to be able to get stronger. What are your circles look like? What are you consuming every day? Are you consuming negative conversations? Are you partaking in gossip? Are you partaking in positive reinforcement? Are you taking up the scripture in your own time? It's not just about going to Bible study once a week or church once a week. It's about genuinely taking some time every day to tune into that scripture. And by no means do I come to you with this message from a lens of I am perfect and you need to listen to me, but from a lens of mere reflection. Because as certain things and conversations have transpired around me in my life recently, I equally have this conversation with myself where I'm like, where can I take more accountability for also not having said something that I knew I should have said, or making a better decision, and where can I acknowledge my accountability in that? So I invite you to really sit and reflect on that. What voice are you listening to? The critic or the empowering one? What does your external environment look like to help you with that decision and those understandings and those steps forward? And equally, how much farther are you going to ensure that the decisions you're making is truly for the best of other people, equally yourself? All right, I have finally made it to church. I'm going to get Noah out. This was a voice recording that I just knew I needed to press play and just go. So if you're like, deal with your baby, I am going to park. All right, I love you guys. I hope this episode was helpful. If it was, shoot me a message on Instagram. Let me know how. Let's start a conversation. And if you need any support, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask as well. I would love to help you in any way I can. All right, I love you. Have a wonderful day. Take care.